Miami Heat legend and soon to be pro basketball Hall of Famer Dwayne Wade has decided to join the ownership group for the Chicago Sky. So lucky for the Sky, they lose one Wade a couple weeks ago and they get another one back in just a couple weeks' time. What was your reaction to Dwayne Wade joining this group, and what do you think this means for the Sky, but also like for the WNBA moving forward?
It's just really dope to see someone of Dwayne Wade's caliber. He's been dabbling into ownership. He has partial ownership with the Utah Jazz, if I'm not mistaken. But it's really dope to see a high level player and businessman and someone of his basketball credibility tap into ownership in the WNBA. I think that all of us who advocate for women's basketball strongly would want this to become a trend and want to see Wade become like a pioneer for others. Listen, I want to see LeBron, Chris Paul, Carmelo, Giannis, Ja Morant. I mean, any of these guys who are tapped into the WNBA. We want to see these guys tap in more, whether it's as owners or whatever the case. But the fact that it's Wade, it's Chicago, there's so much credibility there. We talked about it when I was on here last time with James Wade leaving. And I said, I'm like, there's a lot of upside there. Kalia Copper is there, someone who I think is going to be one of the best players in the league soon, if not already. But this is her year with Candace Parker gone and Sloot gone. You know, the team is down, but she's coming into her own personal identity as a real star. So and there's plenty of upside with the Chicago Sky as a franchise. So to see someone like Dwayne Wade get involved now is really dope to see. And I'll say this too. Let's put to bed all of these idiots who replied to videos and on comments of NBA players supporting WNBA games, making these outlandish claims. This is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. And I've seen I see a lot of dumb things on a day-to-day basis in the basketball world, Marcus. One of the dumbest things I see is fans implying that NBA players are paid to go to WNBA games. Have you ever seen that in comment? There are people on Twitter and on Instagram comments literally making jokes. Oh, I wonder how much he got paid. I wonder what his check was like. Do you really think these guys, first of all, need more money? Second of all, do you really think they need money to go watch some basketball, to go support women's basketball? That's how sad it is out here. But all that aside, I'm proud of D Wade and I'm happy and I'm hoping that this can become a trend.
100%. I think that the thing for me, the biggest takeaway was D Wade said, if you guys remember, the night before it was announced that he joined the ownership group, he was at the ESPYs with LeBron and CP3 and Carmelo and did that thing. And at the ESPYs, LeBron kind of said, shout out to Asia Wilson for winning the award that she won. Make sure y'all tap in. And what D Wade said when he was kind of asked about why he joined the ownership group, he was like, it's one thing to say invest. It's one thing to show up to the games, like wear the hoodie. It's another thing to actually put your money where your mouth is and make the investment. And there were some people I saw that kind of thought that was a shot at LeBron. That wasn't a shot at LeBron at all, because I don't think it was. That's just D Wade being honest. Like, there is, like, put your money where your mouth is. Like, some people walk the walk and some people talk the talk. And this is a perfect example of D Wade walking the walk. Like, I can show up to all the games I want. And let's be honest, I think, me personally, I do think if it weren't for his passing, I think Kobe would have been the first one to do this, because we saw how invested he was in the WNBA, not just because of Gigi, but like the connections he had with Jewel Lloyd, the connection we had, of course, with Sabrina Ionescu. Like, he was at every game possible. Like, every chance he got, he was sitting front row at a game, and not just at games in LA because he's there, but like he was going to Atlanta and going to those games. He was in New York at those games. He was in Vegas he was all over the place. He was in Mystics games, and there's only 12 teams, but he made a point to show up and represent. So when I look at this from the Dwayne Wade perspective, number one, it has to feel good for him, of course, because if I'm not mistaken, he is from Chicago. And so that does feel good for him to want to, of course, invest in the WNBA team that represents where he's from. But like Dwayne Wade said again, it's one thing to like say that you're investing. It's one thing to say go out there and support. It's another thing to put in the work and show, like, I'm not just saying this because it's cool. And I'm not just saying this just because, like, I'm not just an ally. Like, I'm actually here on the front lines, showing that I'm willing to support. And this is going to be the first piece in what I think, as you said, is going to be a major domino effect. We're going to see a lot of players start to do this as well. there's been a lot of rumblings about whether or not LeBron James, not whether or not, but like LeBron James is pretty much stamped already behind closed doors of being the owner of the Vegas team for expansion for the NBA.
Right.
I would have to imagine that if that's true and he does become the owner for that team, he's going to join the ownership group for the Las Vegas Aces. And it's not just because it's Vegas, but also because he's a part of Clutch Sports. And Asia Wilson is also part of Clutch Sports. And they have that connection. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see LeBron James join the Las Vegas Aces as an ownership stake. I wouldn't be surprised if he hasn't already, if we see Kevin Durant join one of these teams, specifically the Seattle Storm, because he's been super, super adamant about the NBA getting back to Seattle. Of course, when he was drafted back in, what was that, 2008, the Sonics were still a basketball team when he was drafted second overall in Seattle, and he wants to go back to Seattle. So I would imagine, I mean, he's investing in pickleball teams. Like he's investing, like I would have to imagine that down the pipe, because of how much of an astute businessman that Kevin Durant is, he'll probably make an investment, most likely in the Seattle Storm. I'd have to think that some of these other, I wouldn't be surprised. I know he's not a basketball player. I wouldn't be surprised if we might see Darren Waller. He's married to Kelsey Plum. Maybe he takes a stab at it, joins one of these. Like, there's so many opportunities for not just players, but for celebrities also to join these groups. We know how much of a big Knicks fan Spike Lee is. Like, maybe Spike Lee joins the ownership group for the Liberty. It's not, I mean, it's technically Brooklyn, but it's New York, though. Like, and Spike Lee's a New York guy. So this Dwayne Wade thing is huge, not just because it's Dwayne Wade, but because it's going to be the first of what I think is going to be a massive domino effect of athletes, especially NBA players, joining ownership groups for the WNBA to further spread and also further bridge that gap between the NBA and the WNBA as well.
Yeah, we just need more basketball people in basketball positions as a whole. I'm glad you brought up the Kobe piece, because that's a really good point. Kobe probably would have been the first by now. And we know that Dwayne Wade was really close with Kobe. You know, they really had, you know, they were really close. And so I'm sure at some level there is some Kobe motivation behind it, and him feeling like he's kind of continuing the work and picking up the mantle there. Last thing I'll say too, it's really dope that Wade, it's almost like Chicago gets another, like Chicago's such a Chicago city, meaning like people who are from there, they're always going to be legends. You know, when people are from Chicago, it's just, both of my sisters are from Chicago, so I'm pretty familiar with it. They lost Candace Parker, which was like a huge blow. You know, she wins a title there, and she left on her own accord. It was fun, you know, it wasn't like bad blood or anything, but losing Candace Parker as a basketball player is tough enough. She's from Chicago. That whole thing was, I mean, the whole storyline is just magnified by the fact that she's from Chicago. They lost her, but now that they're getting Wade in there, I feel like it's kind of it's like a weird kind of replacement. You lost one Chicago legend as a player, you're getting another Chicago legend in the ownership group. So I think that's really dope and really important too.
And here's something else too, when we talk about the domino effect, the conversation that have been happening a lot, especially because of this season, because of how many cuts we've seen and how frequently we've seen the cuts because of roster size and there only being 12 teams. When we start talking about expansion, when we start getting teams back in, and I would assume that at some point every team that used to be in the WNBA will be back as a part of expansion. We start talking about the Comets coming back. We start talking about the Sting coming back. We start talking about the Shock coming back, and like all of the. I would have to imagine that the players that play for the NBA associated city are also going to invest. Here's another name, and he's young, but he's got the connection already because his mom played in the league, and she's a coach right now for Notre Dame. I would expect Jaden Ivey at some point before his career is said and done to invest in a team. And if the Detroit Shock come back, I would expect Jaden Ivey to put in some sort of investment, whether it is to be the owner or to be a part of the ownership group there as well, because of that connection. Like, as the WNBA continues to expand, because it's going to continue to expand, we will start to see more players, specifically players that are either from a specific city or that play for a city that already has that NBA team where the WNBA is coming back to invest as well. It helps, again, like I said, it helps bridge that gap and keep that connection. Like, it's not, the NBA is not better than the WNBA. That's not what's happening. And the WNBA is not better than the NBA. There's a lot of people that have like that tribalist belief. I believe, I don't want to speak for you, but I think you believe as well, that they're on the same level. Like, these are the creme de la creme basketball players in the world, and for the men in the NBA and for the women in the WNBA. And as they continue to expand, just because there are men who are part owners in WNBA basketball teams that happen to be NBA basketball players doesn't take away the value of the WNBA or WNBA franchise, because you've got a former or current NBA player investing. And if anything, that actually makes it better because it's like if the NBA is willing to invest from a player standpoint, if players are willing to invest, both current and former, then what makes you better than them that you can invest? That you can't watch a game or go to a game or buy a hoodie or like sit down and actually enjoy the sport for what it is and not bash it for whatever reasons you want to bash it. Whether it's because you think, like you said earlier, players are paid to go to this game, which is a ludicrous thing to say, or whether it's because you think the rim should be lowered so it can be more excitement. Like the WNBA is a great league, and Dwayne Wade investing in the WNBA is just another great example of the WNBA continuing to move forward.